A Julian Mercer thriller. Chapter 1. Check-in. Chicago, January 1995. Some rooms feel haunted before anyone dies in them. Room 813 of the Drake was one of those rooms. It wasn't the old world decor or the dim gold lighting that made Julian Mercer feel watched. It was the quiet. That breathless, velvet quiet you only get in places where something terrible has happened. Julian stood just inside the doorway, the city humming outside the window like a lullaby for the dead. On the bed, Annabel Ross lay with her arms folded neatly across her chest, as if she'd been praying. Her lips were stitched shut with black thread, the ends tied off like someone had finished sewing and simply walked away. Detective Sheila Moreno stood beside the dresser, flipping through her notebook. She looked like she hadn't slept and sounded like she didn't need to. "No forced entry," she said, not looking up. Card key shows her entering the room alone at 11:42 p.m. 3 nights ago. "Do not disturb" signs. Been up since. Housekeeping found her this morning when they finally overrode the door. Julian took a slow step forward, noting the angles. A turned-down bed, a Bible open on the nightstand, a glass of water with no lip prints. It was a crime scene scrubbed so clean it reeked of intention. "Was she religious?" he asked. "Her editor says no. Didn't believe in much of anything." Julian crouched beside the bed. Annabel's skin was pale, her expression peaceful, in the way the truly terrified sometimes appear, beyond panic. The thread through her lips was thick, knotted with purpose. Whoever did this hadn't been rushed or afraid of being caught. Moreno glanced over. "Autopsy says she died around midnight. Sedative in her bloodstream. Something old school. Secobarbital, maybe, but not enough to kill her, just enough to make her still." Julian didn't reply. He was staring at her hands. They were clasped together like in prayer, but too tightly. The knuckles were white, the nails dug slightly into her own skin, like she'd fought just a little before giving up. He stood and turned toward the desk. A typewriter sat untouched. No notes, no drafts, no pen, no papers. But there was a clean patch in the dust where something rectangular had once sat. "Notebook?" he asked. Moreno nodded. "Editor says she carried a black moleskin everywhere. It's not here." "Recorder?" "Gone too." Julian exhaled. It wasn't just a murder. It was a redaction. Someone was erasing Annabel's voice, silencing her before she could say what she came to Chicago to say. He walked to the bathroom. A single bare bulb flickered above the mirror. It had been recently wiped, too recently. There was a faint smudge near the bottom edge, like a finger had rested there. Not cleaned properly, not part of the hotel's routine. He snapped on a glove, leaned in. The fingerprint was smudged, not from fear, but from familiarity. This wasn't a stranger's touch. It was someone who knew her, someone who wanted to see themselves while they worked. He stepped back into the bedroom. "Her background?" he asked. Marino referred to the file. Annabelle Ross, 34, investigative reporter. Grew up in Missouri, moved around. Last 5 years with the Tribune here. No spouse, no kids, no priors, no threats reported, no stalkers that we know of. Julian rubbed the bridge of his nose. What was she working on? Editor says she was tight-lipped. Something to do with a hospital scandal from the 70s. An old psych ward, Larkspur Asylum. Shut down in 79 after abuse allegations. She said the story had legs, but wouldn't give names. Julian froze. Larkspur? Yeah, heard of it? He didn't answer immediately. His mind pulled him backward. D.C., 1987. A body in a church confessional. Woman, lips sewn shut. Some quote left behind. They never caught the killer. Never even found a suspect. He'd always thought that case felt unfinished. Now it felt repeated. He pulled out his notepad and flipped to a scribbled page he kept for moments like this. Old cases, open wounds. One stood out. Confessional killer, 1987. Stitched lips, silent victims, unsolved. He hadn't thought about it in years. But the signature, the silencing, the staging, the biblical reference, it was identical. This is new, he said quietly. I've seen this before. Moreno raised an eyebrow. You saying we got a serial? Julian didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall in soft drifts. People hurried below, coats tight, faces down. None of them knew what had happened here, how close death could get when it dressed itself in ritual. He turned back. Where's your family? A strange mother in Kansas. Father's long dead. No siblings listed. And the hotel security footage? Moreno frowned. That's the strange part. Every floor had functional cameras, but the feed for her hallway is missing. Wiped clean between 11:58 p.m. and 3:12 a.m. Technician says someone overrode it manually. So someone knew the system. Someone with access. Julian nodded slowly. What else? There's a Polaroid under the bed, Moreno added. We didn't touch it yet. He knelt, reached under. The photo was face down. When he flipped it over, he felt a prickle of ice run through him. It showed Annabelle standing in front of the Drake Hotel, smiling, taken at night. But there was something in the reflection behind her in the glass. A face, blurred but unmistakably human, watching her. Julian looked at the timestamp, January 9th, 1995, 11:35 p.m. 7 minutes before she went into the room for the last time. He turned the photo over again. On the back, a single line written in red ink. You don't remember me, but I remember you. Julian straightened, pulse suddenly sharp. Whoever did this didn't just know Annabelle. They knew him, and the game had just begun. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. The One Who Watches. Unknown narrator, January 12th, 1995. You remember things wrong when you're a child. You think the monsters are under the bed. They're not. They're upstairs, in the locked rooms, behind doors you're not allowed to open, wearing the faces of people you're told to love. I learned that early. I learned to be quiet. They told me silence was survival. They taught me how to stitch a mouth shut before I was old enough to spell the word betrayal. I still remember the first one. Her name was Eleanor, and she bled from her lips when she screamed too loudly during prayers. She had a voice like a music box, sweet, tinny, fragile. They punished her for it, so I did what they wouldn't. I sewed her silence myself, clumsy at first, but I learned. You always learn if the pain is personal enough. You think I hated the place, Larkspur Asylum, but I didn't. Not then. Because monsters live in places like that, and so do ghosts. And when you're raised by both, it starts to feel like home. When Larkspur closed in 1979, I didn't leave. Not really. The walls came down, but the memories didn't. They just changed shape, found new buildings, new names, new girls who looked like Eleanor, who asked too many questions and trusted the wrong people. Like Annabelle Ross. She came too close. She poked her nose where it didn't belong. Thought she could shine a light into a room that was built to stay dark. She didn't realize she wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. I watched her for days before I went inside the room. She had habits, like all of them do. She chewed gum when she was nervous, scribbled notes on receipts, sat in cafes pretending to read but always watching, like she knew someone was watching her too. She had the same frightened boldness as the others, the kind that comes from growing up with the truth trapped inside your ribs. She thought she was the one in control. That's what made it so easy. The hotel gave me the tools, the uniform, the name badge. All I had to do was smile and wait. It's strange how much trust people place in strangers who wear polyester and carry key cards. I knocked once. She opened the door. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. She smiled. I think that was the part that haunted me the most afterward. Not the silence, not the needle or the thread or the way her eyes stared up at the ceiling like they were waiting for God that had never arrived. No, it was the way she smiled, like she knew it was time, like maybe she wanted it. You don't believe me, do you? You think this is madness, that I'm dangerous. You'd be right. But only in the way that fire is dangerous. I'm a consequence, not a cause. You'll find the truth, Julian. You always do. It's what you're good at. Connecting the threads. Stitching the story back together, even when the pieces don't want to fit. But not this time. This time, the thread leads to you. You were there, not in room 813, but before, long before, DC 1987, the church, the confessional. You don't remember, do you? Of course not. You blocked it out. That's what survivors do. They forget, repress, bury. But I never buried anything. I carry it, every stitch, every scream, every sin. I carry it, and now I'm passing it on. This is the part you don't understand yet. You and Annabelle were chasing the same ghost. You just didn't know her name. But I do. Her name was Eloise, and she was the first one you ever tried to save. She was the first one who told the truth, and she disappeared because of it. Don't worry, you'll see her again. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Interview. Chicago, January 13, 1995. Some stories start with a murder. Others begin with a question. This one started with both. Julian Mercer stood outside the Tribune building, collar up against the wind, waiting for someone who didn't want to be seen with him. Thomas Baird was late. Reporters often were. Something about always chasing the next deadline, the next lie. But this wasn't a story Thomas could write. Not anymore. The man finally emerged from the revolving glass doors like he'd been spit out. Mid-30s, tweed coat, nicotine-stained fingers, and eyes that looked like they hadn't blinked in a week. "You're Mercer?" Julian nodded. "Thanks for meeting me." Bear didn't offer his hand. "We do this fast, okay? I already told your partner what I knew. You left some things out." Baird rolled his eyes, then motioned toward the alley beside the building. "We'll talk here. Less ears." They stepped into the narrow space between brick and rust. A single fire escape clung to the side of the building like a broken ladder to nowhere. "She didn't tell me much," Baird said, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. "Annabelle was private, paranoid even." "Why?" "She said she was onto something big. She said she couldn't trust anyone. Not me, not the paper, not the city. Said they tried to bury it." "Who's they?" Baird exhaled smoke like a man trying to exhale guilt. "She didn't name names, but she kept going back to Larkspur." Julian stiffened. "The asylum?" "Yeah. Place shut down in '79. She said there was something there. Something everyone missed. Something about how it got shut down. Who funded it? Who covered it up?" "Did she say who she was talking to?" "One woman," Baird said. "They met twice, maybe 3 times. I only saw her once. Gray coat, red scarf. Older. Had this intensity, like she was half listening to a ghost." Julian pulled out the photo they'd found under Annabelle's bed. "This her?" Baird glanced at it, froze. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That's her. She was with Annabelle outside the Tribune one night. I watched from the window. Looked like they were arguing." "Do you know her name?" "No." "But Annabelle trusted her?" "I think she did. But that's the thing with trust. It doesn't mean you're right." Julian pocketed the photo. What was Annabelle planning to do with the story? She wanted to write an expose, connect Larkspur to a string of hush money deals in the early 80s. Said it all led back to 3 families, old money. One of them owns the hotel where she was found. Julian felt his pulse shift. "You think they killed her to shut her up?" Baird shrugged, but it was the shrug of someone who already believed it. "I think she found something that was supposed to stay buried, and now she is, too." A silence passed between them. Somewhere between the Tribune, a truck rattled over a pothole. The city kept moving, unaware of the quiet war being waged in the shadows. "She left me a voicemail," Baird said, voice suddenly low. "A day before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I was to look under the floorboards in her apartment." Julian's eyebrows lifted. "Did you?" "I went there. Place was already torn apart. Someone beat me to it. Police? No badge, wherever it was, knew what they were looking for. Her notebooks, her tapes, all gone. And you didn't tell Detective Moreno this? Baird flicked ash into the alley. You ever work on a story so long you start to feel like it's working on you? I didn't want to get sucked in. But now? He stopped. His cigarette trembled between his fingers. Now I'm scared. Julian didn't respond. He knew that fear. It didn't come when the killing started. It came when the puzzle started to make sense. He handed Baird his card. If you remember anything else, names, places, call me. Baird nodded once, shoved the card into his coat, and walked away without looking back. That evening, Julian returned to the crime scene. Room 813 had been cleared, but the staff hadn't cleaned it yet. He slipped the latch with the override code Morena had given him and closed the door behind him. He stood in the center of the room and closed his eyes. He pictured her walking in, alive, tired, alert. He imagined a knock on the door, the face she saw on the other side, someone she trusted. He opened his eyes. There were small things you didn't see the first time. A scuff on the inside of the closet, a faint shoe print near the window, dust disturbed in a line beneath the desk. He crouched low and ran his fingers along the edge. Something thin was taped underneath. He peeled it back slowly, a cassette tape, wrapped in black electrical tape. No label, just a number scrawled in red, number 19. He didn't wait. Back at his hotel room, he dusted off the tape player he always kept in his bag. A holdover from a past case, a past life. The tape clicked. Then, a woman's voice. I don't know if this will ever be heard. I don't even know if I'll be alive when it is. But if you're listening, it means I failed. Annabelle. Julian leaned forward. They lied to us. They all lied. The asylum wasn't shut down because of patient abuse. That was the cover story. It was shut down because someone talked, and then someone else vanished. A nurse, a whistleblower, and her daughter. Static. Then, I found her. I found a daughter. She's alive, but she's not the person I thought she'd be. Another pause. Her breath caught. I think she killed someone before, and I think she's planning to do it again. Click. Tape ended. Julian stared at the machine in the quiet. The daughter, the missing nurse, the thread that tied it all together. He suddenly wasn't sure who was the hunter and who was the hunted. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4, Room 813. Unknown narrator, January 14th, 1995. They always ask the wrong question. Not how, or when, or even who. The right question is, why did she open the door? That's where the story begins. Not in the room, not in the thread, not in the way her hands were folded just so, as if she'd done it herself. No, those are just consequences. The door was the choice, and she made it. She made it with clear eyes and trembling fingers. She looked through the peephole and saw me. She could have hesitated, could have questioned her memory, could have walked away, but instead She opened the door, because part of her had always wanted to. The hotel carpet was soft under my shoes, a thick, blood-red hush beneath each step. Room 813 was near the end of the corridor. Quiet, private, the perfect kind of room for someone who wanted to vanish without the burden of vanishing. When I knocked, it was soft, not polite, not assertive. It was a question. She answered it. Her hair was damp from the shower. She wore a hotel robe, tied loosely, like she hadn't expected company, but wasn't entirely surprised. That's how journalists are when they're chasing ghosts. They always suspect they're being followed, but they open the door anyway. "Hi," she said, like we'd met before, and we had, just not in the way she remembered. I didn't speak, just stepped inside. She closed the door behind me. That part was important. She closed the door herself. Always give them a choice, even if the end is the same. She walked toward the desk and picked up a notebook. Her last one, I suppose. I took it later. Burned half, kept the rest. Words like that can be dangerous in the wrong hands, even hers. "I have questions," she said, not looking at me. I sat on the edge of the bed. "I imagine you do." She turned to face me. Her eyes were the same as her mother's, wide, gray, full of storms she hadn't named yet. "You worked at Larkspur?" "Not officially." "You were there?" "Yes." She moved toward me slowly, placing the notebook down on the nightstand beside the Bible she hadn't opened. "What happened there?" she asked. "What really happened?" I smiled. "That's the wrong question." She frowned. "Then what's the right one?" "You should ask why you care." That made her pause. She was used to answers, expected them like breath. But truth isn't something you give, it's something you earn or steal. "My mother," she said. "She told me pieces about the experiments, the punishments, the children they hid." "She didn't tell you everything. She told me enough." I stood slowly. The robe she wore shifted slightly as she stepped back. Her hands curled into fists. "She told me about you," Annabel added. "She said you were like a ghost, that no one believed you existed." I tilted my head. "And yet, here we are. I know what you did. You know what they say I did." She didn't respond to that. I took one more step forward. "She betrayed us. You know, your mother. She chose survival over truth. She protected me. She erased others." Annabel's jaw clenched. She was 17. She had no choice. There's always a choice. She chose silence. I chose to speak. She reached for something. I couldn't see what, but I was faster. I always am, when it counts. The syringe was already in my coat pocket. Secobarbital, vintage but effective. I slid it clean, no fuss. Her eyes widened, then blurred. She stumbled backward into the chair. "I'm not afraid of dying," she whispered. "I know." "Will you tell him?" "Tell who?" "Mercer." "Ah, so she remembered him too." "That depends," I said. "On what?" "On whether he remembers me." The stitches took time. They always do. I'd done it enough times, now that I didn't rush. The thread was black this time. like ink, like truth written where no one could read it. I folded her hands like in old photographs, the ones from the chapel, from the confessional. I placed a notebook beside her on the desk, the Polaroid with me, left a cassette under the desk where I'd find it. He needed a trail, a thread to pull. I even left the mirror wiped clean. It was important that he sees himself clearly, because this story wasn't hers. Not really. And it wasn't mine either. It was his. He just didn't know it yet. And when he does, when the thread loops back to the beginning, he'll understand what I've done. He'll know why I opened the door and why I had to close hers. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Echoes. Chicago, January 15, 1995. The silence in the hotel room was different now. Not cleaner, not quieter, just heavier. Julian sat at the small desk in room 813, elbows resting beside the Bible and the dark cassette tape, now rewound in his recorder. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour, not since the tape ended, not since Annabelle's voice faded out, carrying a warning she died trying to deliver. Her final words echoed louder than any scream. "She's not who I thought she'd be." He played that line back 3 times. Each time, it cut deeper. There was always a moment in cases like this when the puzzle stopped being abstract, when the lines on the board stopped being ink and became people. That moment had arrived. Annabelle had found someone, a daughter of the Larkspur nurse who disappeared. But the daughter didn't want to talk. She didn't want to be found. And now, Annabelle was dead. Julian pulled out the folder he'd requested from the Tribune's archive department, delivered to his hotel in a plain manila envelope. No questions asked. Inside, 3 photocopied articles from 1979. Larkspur Asylum shuttered after abuse scandal. Charges dropped in patient death case. Nurse missing after testimony. Foul play suspected. The last one had a photo, blurry. A woman in her early 20s, dark hair tied back, pale face, a name beneath it. Margot Lindley, 22. Julian stared at it. He'd seen this face before, not in the file, in his memory. He didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. The next morning, he met Moreno at the records office of St. Joseph's Psychiatric, a facility on the edge of the city that had quietly absorbed several patients and staff from Larkspur after its closure. They were led by a social worker named Alice, early 40s, sharp eyes, sharp mouth. "We don't usually allow detectives access to our closed files," she said, flipping through the intake logs. "But considering your victim's connection and the court order you waved at me, I'm making an exception." Moreno gave Julian a sideways look. He hadn't told her about the tape. Not yet. Elise stopped at one page. "This might be what you're looking for. We had a Jane Doe admitted here in 1980. Female, early 20s, severely catatonic, no ID, no known relatives. Admitted by emergency services. Found wandering the highway near Joliet, malnourished, refused to speak. Still here?" Julian asked. Elise nodded. "She doesn't leave her ward. She doesn't speak to anyone, except occasionally repeating a name. We don't know if it's hers or someone else's. What name? L. L something. Maybe Elora or Eloise? Hard to make out. Julian felt the hair on his neck stand up. Eloise. He hadn't heard that name in years, not since DC. She was the girl from the church case in 1987, the confessional killing. She'd be one of the original Larkspur whistleblowers, the case that haunted him, the girl who disappeared. You mind if I speak to her? He asked. Elise frowned. You can try, but I doubt she'll answer. The room was padded, windowless, pale blue and off-white, like someone had designed it to be forgotten. She sat by the far wall, facing away, thin, small. Her hair was still dark, but shot through with strands of silver that didn't match her face. She looked 35 and 60 at once. Julian pulled a chair across from her. I'm not here to hurt you, he said softly. She didn't turn. My name is Julian Mercer. I think you knew a girl named Annabel Ross. No reaction. She's dead. The woman's shoulder twitched, barely. Julian reached into his coat and pulled out the photo from the Tribune archive. He held it out. Is this you? He asked. Her hand lifted, hesitant, then lowered again. Julian placed the photo on the table. Then he added the Polaroid, the one from under the bed, showing Annabelle outside the drake. The woman's breath hitched. Then she whispered, so soft Julian barely heard it. Daughter. He leaned in. Is that your daughter? She nodded once. A tear slid from her right eye and stopped at her chin. Do you know who killed her? She said nothing, but her lips moved, shaping words that never arrived. Then she whispered something else. Julian leaned closer. One word. Roommate. He frowned. Who? She started shaking, whispering to herself, rocking slightly. Elise appeared at the door behind the glass and gave him a signal. Time was up. Julian rose slowly, heart pounding. As he turned to leave, the woman behind him called out, louder this time. Mercer! He froze, turned. She looked at him for the first time. Direct, haunted, familiar. You were there, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. A statement he didn't yet understand. Julian left the room, pulse racing. Had they met before? Was it possible? Or worse, was there something he'd forgotten? Back at the hotel, Moreno was waiting with new information. We pulled fingerprints off the closet door in room 813. One partial match. A woman who worked at Larkspur, Margot Linley. Julian's blood ran cold. Impossible. She disappeared in 1979. Well, either she didn't, or someone wants us to think she didn't. She handed him another file. Check this out. Last month, Annabelle booked a short stay at an address on the south side. Not a hotel, a long-term boarding house. Guess who the registered occupant is? Who? Name on the lease? Eloise Linley. Julian stared at her. He'd be wrong. So had Annabelle. It wasn't a daughter she found. It was a twin. And now One of them was dead, the other still watching. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Nurse. Unknown narrator, January 16th, 1995. They called me a nurse, but I never wore white. White was for the ones who believed they were saving people. I knew better. Larkspur Asylum was not a hospital, it was a vault. A place where the world hid its shame. We didn't treat the broken, we buried them. Girls who spoke out, boys who flinched at the wrong time, women who lost their minds in basements full of secrets. If you didn't fit into the world the way they wanted, they made you disappear. I didn't disappear. I adapted. They taught us to obey, to monitor, to keep notes. They gave us tablets of sedatives and rules etched in stone. Do not question, do not intervene, do not speak. But some of us still listened. Some of us still watched. I remember the first girl who made me question everything. Her name was Eloise, 13, pale, always watching. She never cried, never fought, but she had this way of looking at you like she saw what you'd done, like she already knew how the story ended. She was smart, too. Hid scraps of paper in her pillowcase, doodled messages in the hems of her sleeves. They beat her for that. I helped bandage her wrists afterward, pretending I hadn't heard the screams through the wall. The night she escaped, I was on duty. She told me something I never forgotten. They'll never silence all of us, she whispered. Then she was gone, and I never saw her again. But they made sure I paid for her absence. They took my name first, Margaret, erased it from the staff records, said I'd resigned. Then they locked me in a wing they claimed was under renovation. No windows, no clocks, only lights when they decided. They called it voluntary reflection. It lasted 87 days. By the time they let me out, Larkspur was already under investigation. They needed someone to blame. I disappeared. Some said I ran. Others said I was silenced. The truth is simpler. I fractured. I woke up months later in a new city with a new name and no memory of how I got here. I remember blinking up at white ceiling tiles and realizing I was on the wrong side of the class. A patient, not a nurse. I don't remember everything, but I remember enough. I remember the smell of the thread. I remember the prayers they made us say, stitched with lies. And I remember the woman who came to see me last month, the reporter, Annabelle. She wore her guilt like perfume, thought it made her invincible. She said she was a daughter of one of the Larkspur girls, as they call them now, brave survivors, rebranded for talk shows and documentaries. I asked her if she knew what it cost to survive. She didn't. She sat with me for hours, told me about her mother, how she changed her name, tried to bury the past, told me she'd found a photograph, one with two babies, identical. She said she was trying to find her twin. I stared at her face while she said it, knowing full well she'd never find what she was looking for. Not because her sister was dead, but because she never understood who the twin really was. Annabelle kept asking me questions. about the night of the escape, the punishment rooms, the disappearances. She thought the truth would fit into her notebook like everything else. But some truths don't stay still, they change shape, and some truths become people. The last time she came to visit, she brought me something, a photo. It showed her mother and a baby. Not two, just one. She said the other child, the twin, was never recorded, buried by paperwork, erased before she was born. But someone had kept her alive. A nurse. I asked her why she cared so much. She said, because I think she knows what happened in the confessional. My mouth went dry. That word, the one they never spoke aloud. Confessional. She didn't know what it meant. Not really, but I did. It was where I watched a man die with a needle in his neck and thread in his mouth. It was where the silence began again. Annabelle didn't deserve to carry that weight, but she chose it. She opened the door. I warned her. I told her once. Truth doesn't save you, it unmakes you. She didn't believe me, so I showed her. I let her in, and I took her out. Because when you've spent your whole life in the dark, light feels like a lie. And the only thing more dangerous than the truth is someone who believes they're entitled to it. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. Voiceless. Chicago, January 17th, 1995. The evidence board in Julian Mercer's room looked like something out of a madman's diary. Polaroids, thread diagrams, newspaper clippings, names in red ink, the photos of Annabelle, alive, then dead, stared back at him, silent witnesses to a truth he still couldn't name. And in the center, pinned like a heart, a photocopy of a girl's face from 1979, Margaret Lindley, or whatever was left of her now. He hadn't slept again, didn't want to. The dreams were getting worse. The confessional, the girl with the stitched lips, the sound of dripping water, a familiar voice whispering from somewhere behind the altar. You were there. He was tired of ghosts, but they weren't tired of him. He played the tape again. Annabelle's voice filled the room, brittle with fear. I think she's planning to do it again. Julian paused it. The stitching, that was the signature. A crude, deliberate silencing. It wasn't just symbolic, it was ritualistic, designed to say something. He turned back to his open notebook. There were 4 confirmed cases now. 1979, patient at Larkspur found dead, lips sewn shut, no suspects. 1987, church confessional murder in D.C., woman, early 20s, same method, unsolved. He worked that case. 1992, unpublicized case in Boston, a woman found in an abandoned hospital wing, identical staging, case quietly buried. 1995, Annabelle Ross. 4 women, same silence, same thread, and suddenly he wasn't sure if he'd been chasing the killer or if the killer had been following him. Morena met him at the forensics lab that afternoon. She looked wired and annoyed, her usual setting when something didn't make sense. The results are back from the autopsy on Annabelle, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Aside from the sedative, there's something else. Julian flipped it open. Barbituratus? No. Look lower, under fingernail scrapings. He scanned it, paused. DNA match? Partial, she said. Female. And it's in the system. But sealed. Sealed how? Federal witness protection. Julian looked up. Are you kidding? I wish I was. The request to unseal it was denied. Someone's keeping this quiet, which means it's real. Moreno nodded. The match came close to someone placed in a psychiatric facility under a new name. Someone from Larkspur. Julian felt the pieces begin to shift again. Eloise? Possibly. But if she's in the system, who sealed it? Moreno leaned in. I think this goes higher than we thought. Someone protected her, or protected whoever raised her. Julian's stomach twisted. Someone raised her, which meant whoever the killer was, she hadn't been hiding all this time. She'd be waiting. That night, Julian drove across the city, boarding house, where Annabelle had stayed under an alias. The building was drab, red brick, with a sign out front that read Holloway Arms, weekly rates. The landlord was a pale man named Ivan, with greasy hair and a perpetual cough. He recognized Annabelle's photo, but shrugged at questions. She was quiet, paid cash, stayed 2 weeks, asked about tenants who didn't exist. Julian flashed his badge. What do you mean? Ivan scratched his neck. She asked if anyone lived in room 6B. Said she was looking for a sister. I told her room's been empty since July. No forwarding info, but I saw her go up there anyway. Did she leave anything behind? Ivan hesitated, then motioned for Julian to follow. Inside the room, the air was stale, faintly floral, as if someone had sprayed perfume to hide mold. It had the feel of a place someone once tried to make feel like home and failed. Julian moved slowly. There were burn marks on the carpet, a cracked hand mirror on the dresser, and on the floor, tucked beneath the radiator, a single sheet of paper. He pulled it out, a page torn from a notebook. On it, in dark ink, Julian, look in the mirror, it said. He froze. The handwriting was smooth, almost elegant, feminine, but forceful. It wasn't Annabelle's. It was someone who knew him. He stood in front of the cracked mirror and stared at himself. Not the face. He'd seen that 1,000 times. It was the eyes he focused on. Tired, suspicious, distant, like they belonged to someone else. Then he remembered something from the DC case file, a witness statement. A child had seen a woman walk into the church just before the body was discovered. Blonde, mid-20s, wore a scarf with a strange pattern, red and white. When the child was asked if the woman had said anything, she replied, she just looked in the mirror and smiled. At that time, Julian had dismissed it, probably a confused kid. But what if it wasn't? What if this had been going on longer than anyone realized? What if the killer had been rehearsing the silence all along? He left the boarding house and got into his car. The wind had picked up, scraping the edges of the city. The cassette played, again in his mind. I found her. I found the daughter. She's alive, but she's not who I thought she'd be. Wherever she was, daughter, twin, ghost, she was sending messages now, not just to Annabelle, but to him. Julian didn't know what terrified him more, that he was close to the truth, or that someone had been shaping the truth around him for years. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Confession. Unknown narrator, January 18th, 1995. There are truths you whisper, and there are truths you carve into the skin. Annabelle thought she was chasing the first kind, gentle truth, buried in dusty files and whispered from trembling mouths. But she didn't understand that the kind of truth we dealt in wasn't written on paper. It was written in blood. She wanted a story, but stories have endings. She didn't expect hers to arrive in room 813 under lamplights and sedative. She didn't think the person smiling at her would be the one to unmake her. That's what happens when you chase ghosts and forget there were people once, that they remember being forgotten. When I left the room, I took her story with me, the real one. The notes she hid beneath her suitcase lining, the recordings stored under fake names in the Tribune's archive room. I found them. I kept some, burned the rest. You think that makes me cruel? It doesn't. It makes me careful. Because once the wrong version of the truth becomes fact, it can't be undone. That's what I've been trying to teach Julian. He's always been good at asking questions. He's just never been very good at asking himself the right ones. You see, I didn't forge her confession. I simply mailed it. She wrote it herself. Not because she killed anyone, but because she thought her life was a betrayal. She believed she traded her mother's silence for her own voice, and in doing so, cursed the women who never made it out of Larkspur. That's the tragedy. Not that she died, but that she finally understood everything, just moments too late. The letter will reach him today. I timed it that way. I always do. That same evening, in Julian Mercer's hotel room, the envelope arrived just after sunset. No return address, no postmark. Just a simple white envelope tucked under his door with his name written in looping script he recognized instantly. Annabelle's. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page handwritten letter. To whoever finds this, especially if it's you, Julian, I don't know how much time I have. I don't know if this will ever be seen. But if you're reading it, something has already gone wrong. I was warned more than once, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, because the truth has always mattered more to me than my safety. My mother was a Larkspur girl. She escaped, or so I thought. Now I don't even know if the woman who raised me was the same woman who walked out of that building. There were records she never showed me. A birth certificate torn in half. A photograph of two infants in the arms of a nurse. One of them was not me. I think I had a sister. I think I still do. And I think she knows what I've done. I betrayed our mother's silence. I turned her pain into column inches. I made her ghost dance for strangers. And now the silence is coming from me. If this is the end, please don't make it about me. Make it about what happened there, about the girls who didn't get to grow up, about the boys they buried in unmarked graves, about the nurses who disappeared, and about the people who made it all happen and still walk free. You can still tell the truth. but be careful. It doesn't want to be told. Annabelle. Julian sat back, the weight of the letter pressing on his chest like an anchor. He didn't know what to feel. Annabelle hadn't confessed to a crime. She had confessed to complicity, to telling a story that wasn't hers, to tearing the veil of secrets that didn't want light. And the worst part, he understood, because he'd done it too. In 1987, when he'd taken the DC case, he focused so hard on the victim and the ritual that he never stopped to ask the right question. Who survived? He remembered a girl, thin, silent, eyes too old for her face, a witness. They dismissed her as traumatized, unreliable. He hadn't even written her name down. He thought she disappeared. Now he wondered if she'd just been waiting for someone to open the door again. And now she had. He picked up the phone and called Moreno. "We need a list," he said. "Of what?" "Of every girl transferred out of Larkspur in the final month. Every name, every alias, every Jane Doe that ended up in witness protection or a long-term facility. There's a pattern. We've just been reading it backward." Moreno sighed. "You sound like you're starting to lose it." "I think I already did, years ago. I just didn't know it yet." Julian hung up and turned to the board. He circled the word that had haunted him for years. Eloise. And for the first time since this began, he didn't wonder what she knew. He wondered what he had forgotten. Because there was one final message he hadn't deciphered, the most dangerous one, the one that hadn't been sent yet, and when it arrived, everything would change. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9, The Rewrite. Chicago, January 19, 1995. The hallway smelled of bleach and old tragedies. Julian Mercer walked slowly beneath the flickering lights of St. Marigold's secure wing, every footstep muffled by the dull rubble flooring. It was late. Visiting hours were long over, but he wasn't here for a visit. He was here to see someone who technically didn't exist. Eloise Lindley, who'd escaped Larkspur. The girl who disappeared in D.C. The girl who whispered his name 20 years later from behind a glass wall. He passed a nurse, flashed his badge, and was led down to a locked room marked Ward 4C. "She doesn't talk," the nurse warned, "or hasn't, at least not to us." "She spoke to me," Julian said. The nurse unlocked the door, then paused. "She knew you were coming." Julian froze. "What do you mean?" The nurse hesitated. "She asked for a pen the other day. First time she made any request in months. She gave me something this morning, said I should give it to the man with the tired eyes." Julian's stomach tightened. He took the folded paper from the nurse, tucked it into his coat pocket, and stepped inside. The room was small, white walls, no furniture aside from a bed, a chair bolted to the floor, and a desk with nothing on it. Eloise sat by the window. Her hair was long now, darker, streaked with gray. Her hands were folded in her lap. She turned as he entered, not startled, not surprised, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this. He sat. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, strange and heavy, until finally she said one word. "Rewrite." Julian leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. He pulled a folded note from his coat and opened it. It wasn't much, just a single sentence written in careful cursive. Not everyone who survives wants to be remembered. He looked up. Is that about your sister? A flicker of emotion crossed her face, then something unexpected. Fear. She's still out there, Eloise whispered. You mean Margaret? Eloise shook her head. No, not Margaret. Julian hesitated. Then who? Eloise stared at him like she was trying to will the answer into his head. She was supposed to survive. Julian felt the cold realization seep into his spine. The photograph from the boarding house, the birth certificate torn in half, the idea of twins never officially recorded. And then the puzzle clicked. Two girls born in silence. Only one was ever allowed a name. Eloise didn't blink. Julian stood. The silent one? Eloise nodded slowly. She was born in Larkspur. They kept her underground. They never put her in records. They used her for observation. For what? See what happened to a mind when you took away everything human. Julian had to sit back down. She wasn't a daughter. She wasn't a sister. She wasn't even an orphan. She was the experiment, the ghost born inside the asylum, raised without language, without mirrors, without stories, a person shaped only by silence. They called her Patient Zero, Eloise said. They said she was what happened when they removed the soul. Julian looked into Eloise's face, who tried to run, who tried to testify, who had carried the truth until her mind could no longer hold it. And he thought back to the confessional in 1987. He remembered her sitting outside the booth. He remembered not questioning why she hadn't spoken. She had known how to. And someone else, someone invisible, had walked past her and into that dark little room. That someone hadn't vanished. She'd grown, she'd watched, and now she was writing the ending herself. Back at his hotel, Julian opened his notebook and crossed out the title he'd written a week ago, The Larkspur Confession. He replaced it with something else, The Mirror's Edge, because this was never about closure. It was about reflection, a story told backward, a life rewritten from silence. And somewhere out there, the girl who had never been named was still watching, still listening, still deciding who deserved to speak. His phone rang. Moreno's voice came fast on the other end. We got a hit. Julian grabbed his pen. A woman checked into the Drake an hour ago. Same credit card used under a different name. Same floor, room 817. He was already reaching for his coat. You going? She asked. Send backup, but tell them to hang back just in case. In case what? In case she's expecting me. He arrived at the Drake 10 minutes later. The same elevator, the same silent ride, the same hallway. Room 817 was lit beneath the door. He paused, hand inches from the handle. A memory surge. A girl in a mirror. A whispered warning. You were there. He knocked once, softly, not polite, not aggressive, a question, and the door, very slowly, began to open. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Mirror's Edge. The Drake Hotel, Room 817, January 19th, 1995, 11:47 p.m. The door opened without resistance. Julian stepped inside, half expecting an ambush, half expecting no one at all. But she was there, sitting in the chair by the window, facing the skyline like it was a painting she'd studied 1,000 times. The city's lights shimmered in her reflection. Her face was partially obscured in shadow, but he knew it was her. Same hair, same stillness, same absence of fear. He closed the door behind him, but didn't move closer. He knew better than to chase a cornered memory. She turned her head slightly, enough for him to see her eyes. They weren't unfamiliar. That was the worst part. They looked like his now. "You came," she said, voice soft and smooth, controlled. "I wondered if you would." "I had to." She smiled, just barely. "You're always late, Julian, but you always arrive." He stepped closer. "What's your name?" She turned back to the window. "They call me Zero. You know that already." "I don't mean what they called you. I mean what you call yourself." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Eleanor." Julian froze. "The girl from the Larkspur file?" "She was the first to die," she said, "and the first to be forgotten. So I took her name. It felt fair." He was standing just a few feet from her now. "I remember you," she added. "I remember you," Julian said, "at the church in D.C., the day of the second stitching." She nodded slowly. "You didn't see me," she said. "Not really. No one ever did. You weren't in the reports. I never was. That was the point." He reached into his coat and placed the last photo on the table. The original. Annabelle with her mother. And behind them, barely visible, a child in the glass reflection. A girl with eyes like storm clouds. Eleanor looked at it without blinking. "She was always the loud one," she said, "always asking questions. I admire that. I never had the luxury." Julian sat down across from her. "You killed Annabelle." "I helped her understand," she said calmly. "She wanted to be the voice for people like me, but she didn't understand what that cost. You stitched her lips shut. I gave her silence. She wanted peace. You silenced others before her." She nodded. "They told lies in public. I gave them truth in private." Julian stared at her. "You think you're fixing something? I know I am." "Then why keep sending messages? Why the mirror? Why me?" She looked at him fully now. "You were supposed to protect us." That stopped him cold. "You were one of the first detectives they brought in. You interviewed Eloise. You asked her questions she didn't have words for yet. And when she didn't answer, you filed her away." He felt this sting, deep, real. "You were supposed to see me," she said, voice sharper now. "But you didn't, and because you didn't, the rest of them kept getting away with it." Julian looked at his hands. "I was young. So was I." Silence again. "Then why now?" Eleanor stood and walked slowly to the mirror on the wall. She touched it gently, as if it might bleed. "I used to think the mirror was where I saw myself," she said. "But it was just a window. I've been watching all of you for years, waiting. For what? For someone to stop writing the wrong story." Julian stood. "You've killed people. I've corrected the record. That's not justice." "No," she said, "but it's truth." He stepped forward slowly. "Come with me. Let me help you." She smiled again. You can't help someone who was never real. And then, in one smooth motion, she pulled something from her coat, a blade, long and thin, but she didn't turn it on him. She held it to her own throat. Julian's heart leapt. No! She didn't flinch. I'm not here to hurt you, Julian. I'm here to finish the sentence. He took one step closer. If you do this, the story ends without a voice. She looked at him with eyes that burned. It already did. And then she turned the blade not to her skin, but to the glass. With a swift motion, she cracked the mirror from top to bottom. The sound was deafening. She dropped the blade and sat back down. Julian didn't move. She was bleeding from one hand, not badly, but enough. Enough to remind her she was still alive. She looked at the shattered reflection, then at him. You wanted a killer? She said, but you found a consequence. He called for an ambulance. She didn't resist. Later, at police headquarters, Eleanor Linley was placed in a secure psychiatric facility under supervision. She refused to speak again, not to Julian, not to anyone. The press never learned her name. The department closed the file quietly. The Larkspur scandal was reopened. Some men were indicted, others vanished. Julian wrote his report, but he didn't write her name. Instead, he kept the photo in the reflection. Only one ever got to speak. Final entry, Julian Mercer's notebook. Some truths whisper, some scream, but the most dangerous ones stare back at you from the mirror, waiting to be heard. And when they are, you're never the same again. End of chapter 10 and end of story. Julian Mercer followed the silence to the very edge, and what he found staring back at him changed everything. But the past doesn't stay buried for long, and in DC, secrets never die quietly. If you enjoy this story and want to follow Julian into his next case, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, because some lies are just waiting to be heard. We'll see you in the next investigation.